Programul următor conține scene pe care unii spectatori le pot considera tulburătoare.
The stories that intrigue us most from our past are often the bloodiest and most horrific.
Names like Vlad the Impaler, Richard III and Attila the Hun have an almost mythical status. And we remain fascinated by the dark deeds of Roman emperors and rampaging Vikings.
But it's easy to forget that these people and their victims were real.
And that the facts are usually more complicated than the bloody tale.
I'm Joe Crowley, journalist and investigator.
And I'm Dr. Susanna Lipscomb, historian and author.
Together, we're going to discover the secret stories behind history's most infamous characters and events.
Looking again at history's crime scenes.
So this is it, this is case closed.
Hunting down evidence.
Wow, so look at these. So these are the proof.
And coming to some very surprising conclusions.
Think you know history's bloodiest tales?
Time to think again.
In this episode, we investigate three of history's most infamous tyrants.
Vlad the Impaler, sadistic murderer with a terrifying taste for torture.
The victim is alive. The victim can speak.
Emperor Nero, teenage tyrant of Rome. Did he murder his stepbrother?
So this could be it. This could be the vital clue.
And Philip II of Spain, religious zealot, accused of killing his own son.
He wasn't at all reluctant to use violence when it was for the good of his dynasty.
Vlad the Impaler, a tyrant with a gruesome reputation to rival any in history. A brutal and barbaric killer, notorious for his trademark method of execution.
He once forced a 200,000-strong army to retreat using fear alone. But how did he earn his bloody reputation? How did he become the Impaler? And what's the link to Hollywood's most famous vampire? In the mid-15th century, Vlad III ruled the tiny country of Wallachia, nestling between the Christian West and the mighty Islamic Empire of the Ottomans. When Vlad first seized power, it was from a rival Wallachian dynasty who'd murdered his father and buried his brother alive. Today, his name is still a byword for brutality. Vlad the Impaler, not the sort of name I imagine one casually acquires. But to be honest, the name is about all I know, and I want to find out how he earned it. High up in the Carpathian Mountains looms the castle of Ponari. Fortified with the blood, sweat and slave labor of Vlad's vanquished rivals. Hundreds died here. Those who couldn't work were impaled. Hello, are you Adrian?
Hello, yes.
I've asked historian Dr. Adrian Popescu to explain what impaling entailed.
It involved something like this, a wooden stake. When this was happening, the victim was alive. The stake would have the point directed to a lower orifice. Two executioners on both sides would hold the body towards the stake, while a third one would hammer the stake through the mass of the body. Once that was in the stern, the stake was hoisted up, and the gravity would finish the job.
God, that's really, really horrid.
It is a very old method of punishment, and Vlad seems to have been very fond of it.
Impaling had been used in Europe and the Middle East for centuries. In adopting it, Vlad seems to have decided how to survive in his world.
He spelled it in a document. If you're not a strong man, someone else stronger will come and take your power. So it's kill or be killed.
Executing enemies in this way sounds like the act of a tyrant, but he wasn't the only one doing it. So why has Vlad gone down in history as the Impaler?
While Susie investigates Vlad's reputation, I'm going to wind the clock back to try and find out a bit more about Vlad the person and how he became the tyrant that history remembers. For clues, I've come to Edirne in modern-day Turkey, once capital city of the mighty Ottoman Empire, sworn enemy of Wallachia.
Now, often people are shaped by their early experiences in life, so I want to know more about him, and particularly about his childhood. What could have created Vlad the monster?
Vlad's father had taken an oath to defend Christianity against the Islamic Ottomans. But in 1442, the Ottoman Sultan devised a plan to secure Wallachia's obedience. He sensationally took 12-year-old Vlad hostage. But Vlad's 6-year incarceration was not what you'd expect. Archaeologists believe this building may be where he was held. Professor Andrew Roach has offered to show me round.
It's part university scholarship, part concentration camp. You really did get three things. You got a first-class education, you got Latin, Greek, Turkish, you got a network of contacts, and finally you get to see how a really first-class imperial state works. On the other hand, you've always got that dark shadow hanging over you. I don't think the Ottoman court was a place for the faint-hearted.
Vlad, the so-called barbarian, was actually educated alongside the elite of Europe, including the heir to the Ottoman Empire, Mehmet II.
So this is a very talented class of students, and they are brought up in a sort of training school for rulers.
The Ottomans were playing the long game. They planned to indoctrinate Vlad and turn a potential enemy into an ally. When Vlad's father was murdered in a coup, the young Sultan moved to put Vlad on the Wallachian throne as a puppet ruler.
So the Ottoman investment in the young Vlad, does it pay off? Does he turn out to be this loyal subject to the Ottoman Empire?
Unfortunately not. By 1461, he hasn't paid his tribute, his protection money, for 3 years. And when the Sultan then sends ambassadors to find out what has happened, he murders them. He nails the ambassadors' turbans to their heads. There is only one response, and Vlad must have known that he would get this response, which is full-scale military invasion.
Vlad had rebelled against the Sultan and started a war. The Ottoman plan had backfired in spectacular fashion. They'd unleashed one of history's most violent tyrants.
So where did it go so wrong? There must be something more to this.
While Joe delves deeper into Vlad's past, I want to understand his legacy. And I'm wondering whether it's got something to do with the name he inherited. Vlad's father was known as Dracul, referring to his oath as a dragon crusader against the Ottomans. And as his son, Vlad became Dracula. So my investigation has now brought me into the vampire heartland of Transylvania. I want to find out more about what connects the Prince of Wallachia to the Prince of Darkness. This is Castle Bram, believed by some to be the inspiration for horror's greatest creation. More than 400 years after Vlad died, Bram Stoker released his classic novel, Dracula, about another bloodthirsty nobleman from this part of the world. Surely this is no coincidence. To find out, I'm meeting with Vlad author and vampire expert Gavin Baddeley. So Gavin, what's the connection between the historical story of Vlad the Impaler and the story that Bram Stoker gave us of Count Dracula?
He's decided to write a book about vampires. So he picked up a guidebook on Transylvania and he found this name, Dracula, and it just sounded so evocative. He's originally called his villain Count Wampir, and happily he strikes that out, and now we have Count Dracula.
With a stroke of his pen, Bram Stoker had brought the name Dracula back from the dead. Centuries after he ruled these lands, Vlad became linked with the ultimate horror villain. This must have blackened his reputation even further. But did Stoker borrow more than just the name? But what about the stake? Surely that's an obvious connection between the two.
That's an easy mistake to make. If you're staking a vampire, you're kind of nailing it to the earth, destroying its heart and nailing it to the earth. And that's kind of an act of mercy. Impaling someone most definitely isn't, and you're raising them in the air, anatomically very different. Interestingly, Stoker never refers to his character as the Impaler in the novel, not once.
It sounds like a dead end. Stoker just liked the name Dracula. There's no other clear-cut connection. But Gavin tells me that if it's horror stories I'm after, my quest has not been entirely in vain. So, what have you got to show me then?
Well, one of the things I think is interesting is that Vlad's reign coincides almost exactly with the invention of the printing press. So what I've got for you here are...
woodcuts?
Yes, exactly.
These woodcuts were used by Vlad's enemies to mass-produce pamphlets, which were distributed among the people.
And they're full of these stories of these terrible atrocities. They describe him as a bloodthirsty berserker and all these sorts of things. And you'll see here that there are lots of pictures of some of his victims, rather colourfully described as being chopped up like cabbage.
In other accounts, Vlad is accused of boiling German merchants in a giant cauldron. Stories like this were part of a hugely popular PR campaign against him, turning Vlad into a horror villain in his own right.
Even then, people liked stories that chilled the blood, that turned the stomach. Just the same as people in the 1890s perhaps bought Bram Stoker's novel, and people in the subsequent century went to the pictures and watched Christopher Lee or Bela Lugosi.
So long before Stoker ever heard it, the name Dracula was sending shivers down people's spines. After all these centuries of rumour and fabrication, I'm beginning to wonder whether the real Vlad might not be the man of exceptional brutality that we imagine him to be.
Detectorii de istorie. În fiecare joi la 10 pe National Geographic.
Susie thinks Vlad's reputation as a tyrant might be exaggerated, but I'm not convinced. By 1462, he'd led tiny Wallachia into war against a superpower. It sounds like the act of a madman. Vlad's former school friend, now known as Mehmet the Conqueror, led 200,000 Ottoman warriors towards Vlad's capital, Targovishte.
And it's in defense of this city that Vlad arguably had his finest hour, repelling the mighty Ottoman army using fear alone. So I've come here to find out just how he did it and whether this defining moment is the key to understanding Vlad.
Vastly outnumbered, Vlad's army used guerrilla tactics, capturing or slaughtering small detachments. Historian Matej Kazaku believes that for his Ottoman prisoners, Vlad took his favorite method of execution and added a significant personal twist.
He used this side, which with a lot of grease could penetrate the rectum, gliding around the vital organs, not hurting them, not bleeding, coming up through the mouth. The victim is alive. The birds eat his eyes. He can cry, he can scream, he can talk.
The fact that this is inserted through the rectum and that you're impaled in that way, what do you make of that?
I'm sure that he was abused in the Ottoman Empire.
Medieval sources reveal that child abuse was rife at the Ottoman court, and Mate believes young Vlad was a victim.
So this particular hatred of Ottomans, this cruel and barbaric punishment, you think this actually may have been shaped by the abuse he suffered?
There is no other explanation. The only explanation are these years he spent in the Ottoman Empire.
Could this be the clue we've been looking for? If Vlad was sexually abused by the Ottomans, was this war his personal revenge? By mid-June 1462, Targovishte was within the Sultan's grasp. But outside the city, Vlad was about to win his most famous victory without raising a sword. Calco Condiles, a chronicler in the Ottoman court, provides the gruesome details of why the Sultan's mighty army crumbled with fear.
The first clue would have been up in the sky. As they approached, there would have been a cloud of ravens and birds of prey. The smell, the stench, the reek of death would have been everywhere. What they finally saw was a forest of stakes spread out like a picket fence across a mile, each one with a dead or dying person. They're rotting flesh, bodies in various stages of decomposition, birds picking at them, feasting, some even nesting in the skulls of the dead.
The Sultan himself witnessed this awesome spectacle of terror, an incredible 20,000 impaled bodies.
It was a spirit-crushing blow, sapping the morale of his men, and so finally he ordered them into a humiliating retreat.
This horrific act of psychological warfare has gone down in history as the Forest of the Impaled.
Some claim he's been a victim of historical myth, propaganda and embellishment. But surely this one event must remove